last week. Are you ready for me to start?
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Welcome back to those of you who were here last week. And for those of you who were not, we have Dr. Nancy Lee from Elmhurst University talking to us about nature and where that shows up in sacred texts, not just our own, but all of the Abrahamic religions, Islamic and Judaism, as well as Native American perspectives on nature and spirituality. So we are in a circle this week instead of rows because Dr. Lee requested it this way so that we can have a discussion about it. So can you guys join me in welcoming Dr. Nancy Lee?
Thank you. Thank you all, and thanks for coming back. And I'm looking forward to our continuing discussion and addressing these important issues. And thank you for your name tags. It helps me. I love to know your names. So let me get started first. We did spend a fair amount of time last week talking about our own experiences, and that was terrific, right? And we'll do that a little bit today. But then we're going to move into looking at some texts and traditions, both the Abrahamic traditions, including the Bible, as well as some indigenous examples that we will kind of do a little comparing with. So anyone experienced something with nature this past week that was very compelling? I'll give you a chance to think about that. Anything just happened? You know, sometimes these things happen and we don't plan them. They just, from the grace of God and the cosmos, they just happen. Anybody?
I woke up to birds chirping every day, and I love that. You know, you wake up and you can just hear them doing their thing out your window.
Absolutely, waking the birds chirping. I'm sure we're all beginning to notice that. And
I'm noticing how many trees are really coming out now.
yes,
There's quite a few.
the little leaves are starting to come out everywhere. Did anybody have a chance to maybe go up and just gently touch one of those and look at it really closely? I know I myself tend not to do that because I'm usually moving, going from one place to the next. But it is such an amazing thing to just take that moment and get really close to a tree branch and look at that leaf. We do it with flowers, right? But the leaves are just amazing. We're going to spend a little bit more time on trees today, actually. Anybody else want to share?
I like watching the cycle of the moon, and I can usually see it out my living room window in the evening when I'm watching TV. And I saw the pink moon last night.
Oh, the pink moon last night.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was it actually pink?
It was.
Because when I saw it, it was like kind of hazy, so you couldn't tell.
It was hazy, but it got hazier later on, and it passed over. But yeah.
Orange.
Yeah.
It's orange.
The moon I saw looked more orange than
Yeah.
it was.
Because-
It was bigger than the normal moon.
Okay, but it was full, right?
Really?
Yes, I noticed the full moon also. Beautiful. Yes, ma'am.
I made it our Easter tree. We always do a tabletop Easter tree, so I went outside and cut a branch,
Mm-hmm.
and there were little buds on it, and put it in water. We're hoping made.
Oh,
They're starting to open.
One flower actually is on it. It flowers in the spring like this. So.
Nice. So you made an Easter tree and watched the buds come forward. That's beautiful. Yeah. Okay, how about, did anyone have an experience where an animal, plant, or tree taught you something? Now we're getting into a real indigenous approach here. Think about that. Yes,
I
sir.
had a unique experience with animals in springtime. This was years ago, but I was flying support for the International Geophysical Year in Antarctica. And I had flown into the bay, which is one of the most beautiful spots that I've ever seen in the world. And while they were unloading my aircraft, I walked out on the ice shelf, and there was a big iceberg that was there, and it started melting, and so there was a hole. And a Waddell seal had come up through the hole and was up on the ice shelf, and she gave birth to her pup. While I was there, and I watched her give birth to her pup. And of course, you know, you can imagine all the beautiful white and green of the ocean and the ice, and then this big spread of blood and afterbirth, you know, from the birth. And then the next part of it was when the school adults arrived, because the school adults now wanted to eat that baby if they possibly could, and they certainly fought over the afterbirth. So it was just an unbelievably beautiful experience, and not only seeing it, but hearing, because the ice had sounds as well.
Okay.
So, and it was great because it was spring, you know, and we had just arrived, and it was light enough now that the animals were coming back up out of the ocean to give birth.
Wow. Remind me of your name, I'm sorry.
Ken Hunter.
Ken, he just shared of being in Antarctica, flying in, and witnessing the birth of seal pups on the ice over there. Wow. And that had to be a learning experience too, because whoever saw this in person before, right? And to see how they do things and all that, yeah. And the balance, right? The seagulls have their job to do as well. Yeah, okay. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I saw a hummingbird wasp at Albert Caldwell Pond near the Lincoln Park Zoo. And what that taught me is you don't know everything. I was just totally blown away. It's this big, huge thing that has wings that looks like a hummingbird. It flies like a hummingbird. But it was just something where I was like, I thought I knew everything about my environment. And it was just a sense of wonder and amazement that came over me, and just like, you don't know everything.
Wow. So you saw a hummingbird wasp.
Why?
Anybody else?
Moth.
Moth.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're
moth.
huge. They're about this big.
A moth.
Yeah.
Hummingbird moth. Okay.
It's at the Peyton Notabart Museum.
Right near there,
Yeah,
yeah.
Peyton Notabart.
Very good. Well, I'm going to get us started today by I'm going to give a couple of Native American creation stories, okay? And then we'll look at Genesis 1 briefly, not so briefly, but somewhat, because then I want to look at what some of those authors had to say about things that I sent you. But as I read this, I want you to, in all three of these, think of comparisons. Do you hear anything that these three creation stories share, right? Because a lot of times when we read things intertextually or in comparison, things come out to us that maybe we didn't see before in our own Bible text, right? So, okay. So this is from Braiding Sweetgrass. Yes, some of you have read parts, or some of it. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's Potawatomi. So this is a Potawatomi creation story, and as you may know from many of your studies or readings, that most cultures have multiple stories, and sometimes the same story has multiple versions because it's from oral tradition. But this is her version. She fell like a maple seed, pirouetting on an autumn breeze. A column of light streamed from a hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. It took her a long time to fall. In fear or maybe hope, she clutched a bundle tightly in her hand. Hurtling downward, she saw only dark water below. But in that emptiness, there were many eyes gazing up at the sudden shaft of light. They saw there a small object, a mere dust mote in the beam. As it grew closer, they could see that it was a woman. Arms outstretched, long black hair billowing behind as she spiraled toward them. The geese nodded at one another and rose together from the water in a wave of goose music. I've heard some of that this week. Goose music. She felt the beat of their wings as they flew beneath to break her fall. Far from the only home she'd ever known, she caught her breath at the warm embrace of soft feathers as they gently carried her downward. And so it began. The geese could not hold the woman above the water for much longer, so they called a council to decide what to do. Resting on their wings, she saw them all gathered. Loons, otters, swans, beavers, fish of all kinds. A great turtle floated in their midst and offered his back for her to rest upon. Gratefully, she stepped from the goose wings onto the dome of his shell. The others understood that she needed land for her home and discussed how they might serve her need. The deep divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of the water and agreed to go find some. Loon dove first, but the distance was too far, and after a long while, he surfaced with nothing to show for his efforts. One by one, the other animals offered to help. Otter, beaver, sturgeon. But the depth, the darkness, and the pressures were too great for even the strongest of swimmers. They returned gasping for air with their heads ringing. Some did not return at all. Soon only little muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. He volunteered to go while the others looked on doubtfully. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward, and he was gone a very long time. They waited and waited for him to return, fearing the worst for their relative. And before long, a stream of bubbles rose with the small limp body of the muskrat. He had given his life to aid this helpless human. But then the others noticed that his paw was tightly clenched, and when they opened it, there was a small handful of mud. Turtle said, "Here, put it on my back, and I will hold it." Sky Woman, the woman who fell from the Sky Woman bent and spread the mud with her hands across the shell of the turtle. Moved by the extraordinary gifts of the animals, she sang in thanksgiving and then began to dance, her feet caressing the earth. The land grew and grew as she danced her thanks from the dab of mud on the turtle's back, until the whole earth was made. Not by Sky Woman alone, but from the alchemy of all the animals' gifts, coupled with her deep gratitude. Together they formed what we know today as Turtle Island, our home. Like any good guest, Sky Woman had not come empty-handed. The bundle was still clutched in her hand. When she toppled from the hole in the sky world, she had reached out to grab onto the tree of life that grew there. In her grasp were branches, fruits and seeds of all kinds of plants. There she scattered onto the new ground. These she scattered onto the new ground and carefully tended each one until the world turned from brown to green. Sunlight streamed through the hole from the sky world, allowing the seeds to flourish. Wild grasses, flowers, trees, and medicines spread everywhere. And now that the animals, too, had plenty to eat, many came to live with her on Turtle Island. That's it. Isn't it beautiful? Yeah. Now I want to share with you a story from Cherokee tradition. Okay? I have to find this on my laptop here. Okay, I'm going to read this one too, so bear with me here. This is called Origin of Disease and Medicine. Beginnings of origins, creation. In the old day, this is Cherokee tradition, in the old day the beasts, birds, fishes, insects, and plants could all talk. Remember the snake in the Garden of Eden? And they and the people lived together in peace and friendship. But as time went on, the people increased so rapidly that their settlements spread over the whole earth. And the poor animals found themselves beginning to be cramped for room. This was bad enough, but to make it worse, humans invented bows, knives, blowguns, spears, and hooks and began to slaughter the large animals, birds, and fishes for their flesh or their skins, while the smaller creatures, such as the frogs and worms, were crushed and trodden upon without thought, out of pure carelessness or contempt. So the animals resolved to consult upon measures for their common safety. The bears were the first to meet in council in their own townhouse under Kewaukeee Mountain, the mulberry place, and that is an actual place in North Carolina, by the way. And the old white bear chief presided. After each in turn had complained of the way in which humans killed their friends, ate their flesh, and used their skins for his own purposes, it was decided to begin war at once against him. Someone asked what weapons man used to destroy them. Bows and arrows, of course, cried all the bears in chorus. And what are they made of? The bears asked. The bow of wood and the string of our entrails. The bears' entrails, replied one of the bears. It was then proposed that they make a bow and some arrows and see if they could not use the same weapons against man himself. So one bear got a nice piece of locust wood and another sacrificed himself for the good of the rest. Oh boy. In order to furnish the bow, or the string, the entrails. But when everything was ready and the first bear stepped up to try out the bow and arrow, it was found that in letting the arrow fly after drawing back the bow, his long claws caught the string and spoiled the shot. This was annoying, but someone suggested that they might trim his claws, which was accordingly done, and on a second trial it was found that the arrow went straight to the mark. But here the chief objected, saying it was necessary that they all have long claws in order to be able to climb trees. One of us has already died to furnish the bowstring, and if we now cut off all our claws, we must all starve together. It is better to trust the teeth and claws that we have, for it is plain that man's weapons were not intended for us. And the story goes on that each of the other creatures are complaining about how they've been mistreated as well. The smaller animals, the deer, and let me mention this, the deer next held a council under their chief. And after some talk, decided to send rheumatism to every hunter who should kill one of them unless he took care to ask their pardon for their offense. They sent notice of their decision to the nearest settlement of Indians and told them at the same time what to do when necessity forced them to kill one of the deer tribe. They understood that they could be killed, that wasn't the problem. Now, however, when the hunter shoots a deer, the little deer, who is swift as the wind and cannot be wounded, runs quickly up to the spot, and bending over the bloodstains, asks the spirit of the deer who was killed if he heard the prayer of the hunter for pardon. If the reply is yes, all is well. But if the reply is no, he follows on the trail of the hunter, guided by the drops of blood on the ground until he arrives at his cabin in the settlement. Then the little deer enters invisibly and strikes the hunter with rheumatism, so that he becomes at once a helpless person. No hunter who has regard for the health, or his health, now to this day ever fails to ask pardon from the deer before killing it. Although some hunters who have not learned the prayer may try to turn aside the little deer from his pursuit. Okay, it goes on. They all come together. They're all trying to figure out what to do. I'm going to move to the end. When the plants, plants are around, right? When the plants, who were friendly to humans, heard what had been done by the animals, they determined to defeat the latter's evil designs. Each tree, shrub, and herb, down even to the grasses and mosses, agreed to furnish a cure for someone for any of the diseases named by the animals that they were going to bring down upon the humans. Each plant said, I shall appear to help humans when they call upon me in their need. Thus came medicine, and the plants, every one of which has its use if we only know it. Each one furnishes the remedy to counteract the evil wrought by the revengeful animals. Even weeds were made for some good purpose, which we must find out for ourselves. When the doctor does not know what medicine to use for a sick person, the spirit of the plant tells him. Okay, isn't that amazing? The second creation story of a type of creation story. So then we move to the Bible, right? Come back. Now, we all know Genesis 1, the creation of Genesis 1, right? And let me ask you this, because we don't have a lot of time. I could read through it, but I don't need to, because you know it. Does anything in either of these two stories resonate with what you know of in Genesis 1? Even those of you from completely different cultures and times. Yes, ma'am?
The first story had the darkness of the waters, it was like the
The darkness, right, and the sky woman fell into the darkness, right?
And this might be our other creation story, I don't know if
Sure.
this is one, but there's God using the mud by the river to make a human.
Yes.
And in the Potawatomi story, there's a woman using the mud on the top of the earth.
Make the earth, right? So the use of the soil or mud, the earth, to form the earth or from the earth. Right? A lot of times in my classes, I say, why do you think these ancient stories always talk about creating humans from the earth? Because a lot of other cultures have that tradition, not just the Bible. And we usually get into the discussion, that's because people live close to the earth, right? And they saw that the earth produced. From the earth, creation came. So it made sense that God would create humans from the earth as well. Potters made things out of clay, created, right? God is sometimes called the potter of the Bible, like a potter. Other things that resonated here, are they so different? Share what you think is similar or what you see is very different in either of these stories to our biblical.
Well, one similarity that I noticed is that in the Cherokee story, humanity is kind of separate from the rest of nature. And in Genesis 1, humanity is also separate, created as a higher entity, really. And then I would notice the difference of that being that in Genesis, we're called to protect the earth and care for the earth, whereas in the Cherokee story, that is not at all what humanity was doing.
Right, right. And it's fair to say that in the Cherokee story, they're depicting a time when this was not true. But then in the larger tradition, they understand that humanity is supposed to take care of it. So yeah, but yeah, okay, what else? Anything else?
I wonder if there's a correlation between, about the sequence. Like first God created light or divided the heavens and earth. Then, I don't remember the details. And then he created the waters. And then the plants, then the animals. It just seems like there's a similar chronological development of different parts of the earth.
Yeah. And there's kind of logical progression, right? We know that water is necessary for life, right? And of course, these ancient stories are not scientific in our sense of the word, right? So we see them as kind of symbolic of what an ancient people understood in their time and place and their culture. And yet there are aspects of it that make some sense scientifically, like the need for water for life. It's interesting in the second story, in Genesis 2, the Garden of Eden story, there's a different order. So it says nothing has sprouted yet. And then God allows rain and then creates the human, and then the plants come later. So this is one reason why biblical interpreters say these are two different accounts. The order is different. In the first account, humans come almost last, right? They do come last. but they come closer to the beginning in the second story. And they weren't troubled by this, the ancient Israelites, the ancient Hebrews. It was just two versions of finding meaning and God as creator, right? It was okay that there were different perspectives. Yeah, okay. Yes, this way. In the Genesis 1 account, animals are created and then plants and then animals and then humans, right? Have you noticed when you read that, what do people eat? What do people eat?
Not yet.
Oh, the apple comes later, or the fruit, right. Hang on, I'll just get this. Okay. Verse 29. See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed and fruit you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, humans have the breath of life, animals have the breath of life. The same Hebrew phrase, by the way. And it was so. Okay? So, the animals and the humans all get to eat plants. It doesn't say anywhere that anybody's to eat the animals. Well, I'm not sure why this is like that in Genesis 1, but it's interesting that apparently in the beginning, vegetarianism was the suggested thing. But then I want to ask, so we generally read Genesis 1 is so positive, everything is good. There, a lot of times people say there's no gods battling for who has superior power, like in Mesopotamian or Egyptian traditions. You have a creation story where there's one God and it's peaceful, it's unfolding beautifully, there's purpose, there's order. It's a constructive, positive thing. And that's true. Who in Genesis 1, however, has something not so good happen to it?
Adam. Oh, in Genesis 1.
Genesis 1. The plants. The plants. They're going to be eaten. I had never thought about this until I started going into Native American traditions with emphasis on plants and reread Genesis 1. Who sacrifices themselves in Genesis 1? The plants. And that's a similarity, right, to the Cherokee story.
They're not described as having the breath of life either.
No, right. It's not that they're the same, right, okay? But they do have life, and they are created by God. They are living organisms, right?
Don't tell that to the vegans.
I know. But you know what? It's right. Don't tell that to vegans, he said. But to sacrifice one's life, it's a noble thing, right? To sacrifice one's life.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
I remember reading, I think it's the Potawatomi story, that they even thank the plants for giving them the gifts that they have to offer.
Yes.
Just like they were instructed in the Cherokee to apologize or, be thankful for what they're killing the animals.
I'm glad you said that, because in Kimmerer's book, Raining Sweetgrass, she has multiple places where she talks about, first of all, the different worldview of plants having consciousness, and so that humans can communicate with them and vice versa. And I know this is a very different worldview than what we're accustomed to, right? And so, yes, she has places where she talks about, if I'm going to pick a strawberry, I ask permission of the plant. And then and waits, right? This is crazy otherwise, maybe, okay? But this idea of being respectful and waiting for the plant. And she tells a story of how she went to harvest some wild onions. And she went a little early and dug up a wild onion because it was a custom. And they weren't ready yet. They weren't full of the bulbs, the onions under the ground. And so she realized that maybe she had, if she asked permission, she didn't listen or pay attention to the life of the plant, that it wasn't ready to give up the wild onions underneath the ground, right?
And she also points out that humans have an obligation to help the plant grow.
Yes,
That if you pick something, you need to help it produce more.
yes.
You don't pick too much, or,
Yeah, take only what you need.
yeah,
Take only what you need, and then, right, cultivate, help, give back. And then after you have taken from the plant, thank it. Right? That's another amazing concept, to thank the plants. Genesis 1 suggests a situation where animals and humans should be very much thanking the plants. For without them, they wouldn't survive. Yeah, I mean, it's a parable for us today, right? Without plants, would we survive? No. Of course, animals too, for those who eat meat. But animals depend on plants, right, to survive.
Also the insects, we need the
We
bees and
need them
insects
all.
to pollinate.
We need them all, the bees, the pollinators, yeah. So there are parallels in these stories. Now, one of the things I sent you all was an article by Ellen Bernstein, and she is a Jewish biblical interpreter, and I wanted to put up here a few of her key points as she reads Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and 3, the Garden of story, kind of pulling out some key points. Right? Genesis 1 suggests God's creation is ongoing. It's not a once thing and then it's over, that God does it, right? But she suggests that a way to interpret it is God is always involved, an ongoing creation, through the ages, down to today. And so this comes back to what we talked about last week, and the first kind of point in that is that we can, as people of faith, look at nature as spiritual, as coming from God. Right? We're thankful for the beauty of it and what it provides. God is like a mother eagle hovering over her nest. This is from Genesis 1, first verse. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, that is the deep, the waters. While a wind or breath, or the spirit, same word in Hebrew, ruach, wind, spirit, breath. You translate it, it can mean all of those things. But here in English, a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. But in Hebrew, the word is not swept so much, meaning it's more like brooded over, fluttered over. Same word used for a bird in other texts. That's why the rabbis came up with that understanding, that God's spirit was like an eagle or bird hovering over its young to produce, to bring them forth or to feed them, etc. God creates habitats, Bernstein says, right? So if we read this from a more modern scientific perspective, that each of the creatures in their space are not just, simplistic, literal. It's like the suggestion is that God is creating habitats, and all of them together are in an ecosystem of balance, right? God blesses both the creatures and humans, right? If you go back and read the text, it's not just humans that are blessed. Sometimes I ask a question in my classes, why were the humans created last? And some people say, well, because they were the best. They were the highest. They were the pinnacle. But some say, well, last isn't always best. Maybe everything that came before was really important and necessary, and without them, humans would not make it, right? And that they are just part of the whole, right? And yet we know humans are somehow different and made in the image of God. Well, that's in the text too. So that is interesting. But all are blessed, both made from the soil, both have the living breath of God in the Hebrew. Right? Same phrase. This, she says, we're interrelated. It suggests boundaries and limits. Then she calls into question something that's been happening of late. People who are concerned about the environment, climate change, all that, are often going back to the Genesis 1 text, where it says, where God says to humans, let us make humankind in our image. Let them have dominion. Remember that part? Over what? Over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And it's kind of repeated a bit later. So I've read, there are plenty of people out there who are saying, this is part of our problem. Right? Humans have interpreted that text to mean, hey, we're over it all. We can do whatever we want. Right? It actually draws on royal imagery from ancient cultures where kings ruled. Kings had dominion. God is like a king. He speaks, and it's done. In a way, you can see it kind of like God is like a figure above everything. Speaks, and by edict, it happens. Right? So there is some borrowing of imagery and meaning from cultural practice. Have dominion. But Bernstein says she doesn't really want to go along with all those folks who are criticizing this text so roundly. She wants to say, actually, if you read the whole thing, humans are put on the earth to be deputies, kind of God's care and responsible stewardship of the earth, co-creators, right? And this, I think we will all agree that, yeah, we should do that, right? So she kind of wants to reinterpret that text in a more positive way. Because one can govern without being destructive. One can govern in a positive way for the common good, for the good of the earth too, right? And this is what we're all trying to get to. The Sabbath is a profound ecological for the earth. And I just put there why. Think about the concept of the Sabbath. Maybe we can discuss this a little bit. Why is the idea or practice of the Sabbath important for the earth? What do you think? There's not like one right answer, but what kinds of things? What does this imply?
Well, I hear of farmers that like every so often will leave a field not being used for planting and everything, so they can kind of
Like fallow?
You use it for 3 years and then you have to let it for
Yeah.
3 years for another year and then you go again.
Okay.
You're growing the same thing like my father was. He grew pineapple and you cannot keep growing up to 3 years, will not produce the same quality. And the earth needs the rest. And you burn, you stop and let it rest. And then it will be beautiful.
So in the 3rd year it rotates.
Yeah.
And you mentioned letting fields lie fallow, farmers' fields. It's a kind of Sabbath rest. And it's mentioned in the Bible and other texts, right? I think it's the 7th year. Don't glean from the fields. Just leave it for the birds and animals. And also the poor can come anytime, not just in the 7th year. Poor can come.
I do it in my garden, that in the fall I cut everything down and take it, and at the same time I have a little bird feeder there. And I do that. And I don't put food in the winter. And like my grandmother and I did it Monday because the bird was coming by the window. Where are you? We need food. So we went and put it back in. And you don't have to do so much. It just, I mean, I have a wild garden. I don't have one of those.
Very nice, very nice.
I just let it grow naturally.
Let it come back. Other reasons why Sabbath is important. for care of the earth.
It's a collective-
Human Sabbath, I'm sorry.
It's a collective concept that we don't just have Sabbath myself, I'm supposed to do it, make sure nobody I work for has to work, nobody that I pay for their way has to work. So it's a sort of understanding that we collectively are responsible for it.
Very nice, a collective practice. People who are employers, people who are employees, the idea. There are some companies today who still, sounds like, are you in a company that does it? No, you're just saying, hypothetically. But there are some companies we know that are closed on Sunday. We all remember blue laws, right? Blue laws? Remember the blue laws? Yeah, I do. Hardly anything was open on Sunday
Yes.
in the old days.
Yeah. Car dealerships, you know.
And still today, car dealerships usually are closed on Sunday, which I don't really get that because everybody else is open.
Some places close early.
Close early, that's right, on Sunday.
So they're doing something.
That's right, that's right.
There are a few businesses that close on Sunday.
That's right.
Not too many.
Right.
There are a few. There are a few, even local.
We won't go today, we'll go another day.
That's right. Especially smaller businesses, I think. If you go to a small town or a rural area, good luck in finding something open on Sunday. Because there's still that old value of, a lot of people believe Sunday is a Sabbath. Right? What else about Sabbath? And I think Bernstein mentions this. Another thing, important thing is that when we, I don't practice Sabbath like I should. I mean, it's hard to say, it's hard to find people who really, Jews actually, observant Jews, do all their work on Friday, and then Friday at sundown, start Sabbath until sundown on Saturday. And today's Passover, right? Yeah. And so, but the observant Jewish practice of Sabbath really is still trying to hold to this. No work. It's a time of rest, relaxation.
They don't even have bus service in Jerusalem on Saturday.
Okay, did you find that out? No? Yeah.
I didn't hear what she said.
They don't have bus service in Jerusalem on Sabbath, right?
Yeah, my husband's mom had come from England, and we went to visit the grandparents, and Nanny would cook all the food on Saturday, because Sunday was a cold meal.
And that's a Christian?
Right.
Yeah, Christian practice. Very interesting, right? Part of what Bernstein is saying, and also Abraham Joshua Heschel, if you know his name, he was a famous Jewish biblical and scholar and philosopher. He wrote a book on the Sabbath, which is really good, by the way. But what they were saying also is that to have Sabbath is for humans to stop taking from the earth, stop business, stop exploiting, if there is exploiting, to stop all of that, and to let the earth be alone. Because a lot of these stories are trying to suggest that the earth has its own integrity. Nature has its own integrity, animals and plants. Think of our modern way of life. Trees, animals, they are so subject to the constant barrage of traffic, of noise, of air pollution, of human everything, right? If the world collectively ever really just all stopped at once, it would be a great respite for the earth. But now factories and businesses, they run 24/7, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There's no stoppage. There's no stopping of taking or making money off of, right? So what she is saying and others say is that Sabbath is actually, would have a huge impact if it were really followed fully, a huge impact for the benefit of the earth. And for the benefit of the green movement, for example, right? And this is where I think spiritual traditions, if applied to what people are trying to do with the green movement and constructive action to help the earth, would really be powerful. I'm sorry, you were gonna say?
I'm sorry, I was interrupting you.
No.
I remember after 9/11, when they stopped all air traffic, and what a difference it made in the air quality.
I'm glad you mentioned that. You all remember that?
Yeah.
How quiet it got? I mean, we live in Chicago. We never are free from planes, right? And then we don't even notice the noise anymore.
But we noticed it when it got quiet.
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
And it wasn't just the planes, people weren't driving,
Right.
I was in school in downtown Chicago at the time, and it was a ghost town. I mean, we could walk down the middle of the street on a Wednesday afternoon, and there was nobody there.
And how did you guys feel about
It was uncomfortable.
that? You liked it, right? We liked it.
Well, I mean,
It kind of.
Scary too.
Yeah.
It was scary for the reasons we know,
Yeah.
but it
No,
was
it just was
nice.
something we weren't used to. It was like, oh, this is really odd. This is,
Yeah.
never felt like this before.
But what if it was intentional?
Exactly.
What if we did that in such a way that we got to experience that every week? Oh my goodness. What peace we might have, what, restoration of our souls and
the plants and animals, I mean.
And the plants and
all in
animals.
nature.
yeah, what stress we would remove, right?
It's interesting in that way when you say that. It was like, we have a 2-flat and we had a tenant who would cook steaks on with a T-bone and have it for our dog. Our dog knew when it was Sunday. Really, I mean, it's just, I remember that because she would be waiting for him.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because we're speaking about pet, right?
Yeah.
And if we are speaking about, how are we doing on time? Oh, if we speak about nature, wild nature has had to accommodate us, right? As the early stories talk about.
Yeah.
What if we had Sabbath in such a way that everything stopped and we had what we're talking about? Would wild nature wait for it and hope for it and long for it and experience it? I think yes. There's a text in Romans 8, and I think it might be about some other things too, but it says, all of creation groans with longing, the revealing of the children of God. Like if we truly be fully children of God, all of creation hopes and waits for us to be there. And what would the world be like? We have a little bit more time, and I want to just throw this text up because we haven't dealt with a lot of text, but this whole text is rather disturbing because it's about how to fight holy war, which I don't want to get into today. But at the end of it, it's got this very strange, to me, addendum almost. If you besiege a town, you must not destroy its trees. You may take food from them, must not cut them down. Are trees in the field human beings that they should be under siege? Interesting.
Well, yeah, that's interesting because the people can go into the city walls and protect themselves. The trees can't move.
Right.
So it's an unfairness argument.
Next, the third week, not this coming Sunday, but after Easter, we're going to look at more texts, especially in the Psalms, that look at how trees and nature are depicted and understood in this more indigenous worldview as spiritual beings, actually. Okay? So anyway, I wanted you to see that real quick. But I also wanted to say a few words about, Brian McLaren's article is really good, and so you might want to take a look at that. Because he talks about how, before you look at that, let me just say Brian McLaren, one of his main points is that in the history of Christianity, the tendency has been to think that Jesus is coming again, okay, second coming. It was very popular, it still is among some. And so this earth is going to pass away. Because of what Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden, they screwed it all up, the earth is cursed. It's kind of like a throwaway earth. And he's critiquing that attitude, okay? But then we come to some Muslim points, and this is by Basil Mustafa, and this is a really nice article if you want to have a chance to read it, and I've just summarized some of his key points. And a lot of people, we wouldn't think about in the Quran, in Islam, what is this Abrahamic religion's view of nature, of the earth? Well, it's very similar to Jewish and Christian views. God is creator, right? And we're to be responsible stewards of it. Nature has intrinsic worth because God created it. We're to be responsible, show compassion, maintain the balance that God has created, as in Genesis 1. And he gives some quotes from the Quran, which are kind of beautiful. The sky has he, God, raised high, and has devised for all things a balance, so that you, humans, might never transgress the balance. Interesting. There's also Islamic law prohibiting inflicting harm. This is coming from the Quran, but also some of the teachings of Muhammad in ancient times. The Prophet taught that offering a grain like a seed to a bird or a sip of water to a thirsty animal is a rewarding deed. There is a reward of kindness to every living thing. There is not an animal that lives on the earth, nor a being that flies with its wings, but forms part of communities like you. Here we get into a really sounding like an indigenous worldview. They have their communities, you have yours, you're in relationship, right? Respect them as a community. And look at the last one. If any Muslim plants a tree or sows a field, and a human, bird, or animal, each one, it shall be reckoned as charity. This comes back to your point, right? Right? There's no person who kills a sparrow or greater without purpose, save that God, most glorious and majestic, will hold him to account for it. And justice is also greatly emphasized. It's part of the principles of caring for the earth and caring for other humans. So we'll leave this behind, but yeah, we're running out of time here. So hopefully, in comparing some of these traditions, I hope that it helps us feel like we are part of a very large human and non-human family. Right? We're all in this together. We know this more than ever, right? Today. We're all in this together. And as Robin Kimmerer, the subtitle of her book is Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, she affirms that, and the Teachings of Plants. The wisdom is there. There's a lot more wisdom for us to be gained from nature, from plants, from animals, from other cultures, from other religious traditions. And hopefully we can come together, whether it's to have a Sabbath day like, we can enjoy again, or whatever we do to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you.
So a few housekeeping notes before we go. Dr. Lee referenced things that she sent to us. If you are on the emails that Dale sends out every week for adult education, the one this past week included the reading from Mustafa, the reading from Bernstein, and the reading from McLaren. So those are all in that email, and I assume if Dr. Lee sends anything else, it'll also be in a similar format when Dale sends out that reminder email. We do not have any adult ed next week, so we don't have the speaker series, we don't have the Bible study, it's Easter Sunday, so no adult ed next week, but Dr. Lee will be back with us the following week for her final talk with us.
I forgot to mention maybe what I felt was going to be the most important thing I wanted to say. Did I do that?
Yes, we got time.
It's Palm Sunday. We're entering Passion Week. And it's a time of contemplation of Christ's suffering. He was crucified, sometimes it's said, on a tree. And I, for myself, I don't know about you, but more and more I think about who has suffered most like Christ for us. It's nature. Nature is most like Christ. Plants, animals, and the earth. So maybe that can help us move ourselves toward, also being sacrificial, but in order to protect, those who have done more suffering than maybe we have. Don't know for sure, but there are plenty of humans who have suffered a lot. Okay.
Thank you.
If you are not on Dale's email list and you would like to be, you can let me know and I can take down your address so he can add you, but otherwise, that information should all be there.
I just want, it came Friday night, he usually sends it Saturday. So
Yes,
so if you
he's
missed-
traveling,
If you missed
yep.
something Friday in the evening, go back and hopefully.
Okay. I don't always be there.